Hey everyone, I'm rather incoherent, and I have a problem. It's especially apparent when it comes to weapons, but it might be generally true outside of weapons as well. It's just much more noticeable when it comes to weapon selection. I have a set of cards that I gravitate towards super hard when it comes to weapons. When it comes to making a deck do X or Y, there tend to be a lot of various approaches to it that do it through different methods, but every weapon just does the job of killing enemies by dealing damage. There's really no exception to that formula. The most it gets mixed up is, does it exhaust, does it use ammunition, or is it just repeatedly usable like a melee weapon? Today, I'm mostly making this video to ask you what weapons you think I should be running more. I'm going to go through class by class, talk about the level 0 weapons I use, that's what this first row is, the higher level weapons that I gravitate towards, and then talk about the notable exceptions to this list and why I think that they're not really very important for optimizing a damage-dealing enemy management type of character. Now, going by class, I could have put like Occult Lexicon Ancient Stones here for Seeker, but I don't build Seekers as enemy managers. That's not their job. It's nice to have them flex and be able to do that to an obscene degree to just make sure their team is always okay. But the fact is that I'm not building Seekers that way. It's not their purpose, so I feel like they're sort of outside the realm of this video's subject. I'm talking about primary fighters. Looking at the Mystics, I don't think it's actually fair to say that I gravitate towards dealing damage with Mystics in a way that isn't really fair. I have the level 5 damage spells up at the top. That's really because I gravitate away from using them and building my Mystics towards Cluevers in general. If I were making a fighter Mystic, I would obviously get that. But I feel like Mystics really just have very limited damage options. You're always picking the damage spells like Shriveling and Azure Flame. You can mix it up with Sword Cane, and Sword Cane is such a good card that usually you want to. And if your character can abuse Cyclopean Hammer, then you want to abuse Cyclopean Hammer. Not all Mystics can, of course, but every Mystic that can wants to, because it's a better damage-dealing card than your level 5 spells, and it has infinite uses and doesn't take up an Arcane slot. So even though I feel like I don't really get out of the box very much as Fighter or Mystic in terms of how I think about building them, I think that in terms of the weapon asset choice you have, there's not a lot that I'm ignoring with Mystics. Like I'm ignoring Wither. I tend to really strongly not care about evasion spells, because if I do desperately need to evade on a Mystic, Sword Cane is usually good enough, and most of the time that's just not a thing I need to do to begin with. So Mystics, like Seekers, this video is really not as much about them. I just have them here to mention that they exist. Coming over to Rogues, I have Tony Morgan out, because this is really a discussion about Tony Morgan. Dark Horse Finn is a thing, Skids is a thing, Leo is considering the lower level green stuff. But honestly, there are so few green fighters that this discussion is more about Tony Morgan than everyone else put together. And that's why Knuckle Dusters is here. When you're looking at a 5+ character, it's real hard to not think, how do I optimize Knuckle Dusters? Because they're absolutely disgusting on Tony. But also, just at level 0 for green weapons, the Mauser is kind of the only good one. Yeah, it might exhaust itself sometimes. But if you're going to run a charge-based weapon to do your job, you can't afford to bring a gun that only has 3 shots in it. The Mauser's just the best level 0 green weapon. It's the only one they have that can make a blue character jealous. And then Knuckle Duster's insane if you have the stats to back it up. And even though there's a whole slew of other green cards in their weapon slots, I feel like almost all of them are bad. As you start upgrading your green characters, though, I don't see any reason to ever not just go for Switchblade. They have a lot of ammunition support. They have Contraband and Swift Reload and big guns like Chicago Typewriter and the Beretta. But at the end of the day, why do I spend all this experience and resources and additional card slots when I could just stab with the Switchblade? And I don't mean like, oh, Tony has 5 fists, so he doesn't need the Chicago Typewriter. I built Switchblade Skids as well. And at no point did I think, man, if only I'd ran the Typewriter, my deck would have been better. And the reason for that is because instead of using card slots for ammunition support, is that I use those card slots for things like the Ace of Swords Tarot, for beat cops, for as many static fist bumps as I could possibly put in my deck, Geas, whatever, anything. And then if I don't draw Chicago Typewriter, those cards aren't dead. I can still punch, they can still help out my survival knife swings. I just feel like when you're looking at green characters, Switchblade is so insanely strong, even at tabooed to 3 experience, that the investment in any sort of ammunition-based archetype demands of you with Chicago Typewriters isn't really worth it. I think especially with green characters, it's bad. And you can argue that I'm saying, especially with specifically Tony, I'm very rarely deviating from this formula. But at level 0, I always use Knuckle Dusters if I have good enough fists for it. I always use Mauser if I'm a fighter with green 0. And I pretty much will always upgrade to Switchblade 3 because it's just so good at its job if the character has it available. Coming over to our blue weapons, I don't actually have anything up here, because I'd basically just be putting the entire card pool up here. Blue has a lot of weapons, and I'm not using anything really beyond this set. I'm going to go through and talk about like the 3 different ways that I upgrade blue characters. And these weapons aren't really related. I can run Survival Knife and Cyclopean Hammer, but there's sort of 3 separate upgrade paths for a blue character that I will always pick one of. Survival Knife is how I built my skids because it's the only one I have access to. But at level 0, I'm pretty much always just looking at 45 automatic because it's just a good gun, and Enchanted Blade because it's just a good gun that helps you kill acolytes without using charges. They're both just really, really solid weapons. And aside from that, since Machete's on the taboo list, there's really no close third place. I'll usually pick up another weapon, but I try my best to get it from my class's additional card pool, or to just run additional draw if I'm someone like Roland with access to Seeker cards and a unique gun. But while these cards are pretty much always in my level 0 deck, I struggle to immediately name other blue level 0 weapons. There's the Colt and the Blackjack. I remember those because the Colt's basically a Mark Harrigan only gun and the Blackjack is a meme. And then after that, it's like, there's the Thompson, that cross-class green-blue card. That one sees a little bit of play. It's usually the one I go with. It's so resource expensive that I don't like it, especially at level 0. But it is still a playable good gun at level 0. But yeah, I feel like at level 0, I very rarely deviate from this as a blue character. I don't even know what the argument for other weapons would be. As I start upgrading my blue characters, there are 3 routes we tend to go. Used to, it was pretty much always flamethrower builds because, well, flamethrower is really, really damn strong. There aren't that many relevant body slot cards. It's just absolutely sick. If you're going to build around a card, flamethrower is the kind of card to build around. These days, though, I don't see much reason to build it on flamethrower. I might still do it in a campaign if there are specific 4 or 5 health enemies that I need to kill quickly, because flamethrower or a flamethrower with like a vicious blow or a beat cap thrown in are better answers to that than Cyclopean Hammer. But Cyclopean Hammer, for 1 more resource, 1 less XP, and no body slot requirement, is an unlimited weapon that on, I think, every fighter guardian swings at 7 or 8. I think that's true on all of them. That's going to be worse than the 8 to 9 of flamethrower. But for unlimited uses, that's pretty sick. And if you're running a card like Brother Xavier or a Bandolier, which flamethrower couldn't have, then you're going to be pumping this up higher to make up for it. Cyclopean Hammer is just unlimited beat stick. And unlike Sledgehammer or any other melee weapon, it's a good enough beat stick that you can easily argue you should use it over Flamethrower, even in a final scenario. The different option is Survival Knife. And yes, you can run Survival Knife with Cyclopean Hammer. It's largely unnecessary because the Cyclopean Hammer is so good, and the resource cost of Bandolier Survival Knife with this hammer is massive. So I wouldn't really recommend it. But the way that Survival Knife upgrade fits into this picture is that sometimes you don't really need a big in-game weapon. Maybe you're not primary fighter, or maybe you're an off-class character. And Survival Knife just combos with these other weapons by being the only offhand weapon that actually contributes if you aren't attacking with it. Usually if I'm running a Survival Knife, I'm also picking up Bandolier. And that's why it tends to be mutually exclusive with Flamethrower and Cyclopean Hammer. With Flamethrower, you physically can't. And with Cyclopean Hammer, you can do that, but we're looking at a minimum of 9 resources, 9 experience to do this combo without even getting the second Survival Knife in play. That's a lot of draw, a lot of money, a lot of experience, and it tends to not be the best way to add experience to a Cyclopean Hammer deck. But this is the cheapest way, and it gives you a head boost along the way to add damage to these low-level weapons if that's what you're going for. Or if you're all-class blue, like in the case of Skids I was talking about earlier, Survival Knife tends to really help. Skids and Yorick are huge fans of Survival Knife. Red struggles with action compression and burst damage. Survival Knife helps with that. Skids has 3 fists. He hears +2 fists, and he's already put the card in his deck. He doesn't even know what it does. So I think Survival Knife does have a huge amount of merit that actually lets it stand up with Cyclopean Hammer and Flamethrower. But outside of these 3 paths, I really don't seriously consider other cards. I have like this set of really good level 0 weapons I gravitate towards. And then going into a campaign, I probably pick Cyclopean Hammer. I might pick Flamethrower depending on enemies. Sometimes I'll pick Survival Knife setups, but very rarely do I consider something else. And Flamethrower used to be the problem. Cyclopean Hammer is like now arguably outclassing Flamethrower, but Flamethrower was already outclassing Lightning Gun and Shotgun. All of the other big blue weapons, I look at them, I look at Flamethrower, I sigh, and I pick Flamethrower. That just happens every time I look at a character. Do I think it's absolutely sick to put Lightning Gun, Bandolier, Survival Knife in the same deck? Yeah, of course I do. But I could have spent a lot less experience and a lot less resources just running Flamethrower which hits for 1 more damage and can multi-hit multiple small enemies. So the reason I haven't put a bunch of blue cards up here, all the big guns, all the small guns, pretty much their whole damn card pool, is just because it's like everything else. This very narrow window of blue is what I'm really playing with. And lastly, we come over to our red weapons. And our red weapons are where I feel the worst. A huge part of red characters feeling balanced to me is that I don't feel good about their ability to compress actions, either as a cleaver or as a fighter, but especially as a fighter. Chainsaw here is indicative of every experienced red weapon. None of them feel like they are meaningfully better than the level 0 red weapons. I would much rather spend my experience on other cards than the red weapons, because frankly, Meat Cleaver and Fire Axe are just sick. If you're a Dark Horse deck, Fire Axe is an unlimited 2 damage melee weapon. And if you're not a Dark Horse deck, then get Pete, get some additional Horror Soak, and get to be best friends with the Pete Cleaver. Because Meat Cleaver is also sick. It's not technically unlimited, you gotta be killing people to get the horror back or finding some way to deal with that. But you're still swinging it +2 for 2 pretty much all the time. +1 for 2, more likely than not. You don't really want to be at 3 or less sanity, but that does frequently happen, especially with Pete in play. Both these weapons are one-handed and very good. So I could spend my experience upgrading to stuff like this, or the old hunting rifle, which can jam. Or I can just stick with this, spend the experience somewhere else, and be kind of upset about it. And like I was mentioning earlier with Survival Knife, it's a big thing in ALF-class blue fighters. Yorick having Survival Knife is a huge part of why I think he's one of the better Survivor fighters, because I just don't like the weapon choices available. There are several other level 0 weapons that I don't seriously consider in the red archetype, but I don't consider them notable exceptions. Most level 0 weapons for red really aren't that good. But I think with red, more than anything, I feel like I'm missing something. Like there's some other way to build their fighters than just sighing and using the level 0 weapons all campaign. But if it is a thing, then neither I nor our resident Survivor player has figured out what it is. We've never really seen anything that was meaningfully better than the Meat Cleaver. Like, we play with Sledgehammer 4, it's awesome, but it's not meaningfully better, it's still 2 damage per action. We played with Chainsaw, I don't know if we played with Old Hunting Rifle. We've done all of these other things, and every time I try to look at making a red fighter, I'm like, God, this class already struggles to spend experience, and I don't even want to spend experience on the upgrades for my primary asset, because the Chainsaw hits at +2 for 3 times, and the Meat Cleaver hits at +2 for 2 an unlimited number of times. So why am I giving up a resource for experience and a hand slot for such a marginal benefit? And again, I'm not convinced I'm right about any of these things I've been saying. Legitimately, this video is just me talking about this, like, white list of meta weapons that I immediately default to and have a very hard time arguing myself out of. And I'm wondering what options I'm missing. I feel like there have to be at least a couple. When you try to optimize a game, you narrow it down real fast. You can end up looking at a very small portion of the game, because there tend to be best choices. But I feel like my window is so narrow that I've got to be missing some things. Anyways, that's it for me. I've been rather coherent. I hope you enjoyed the video. I sincerely hope you have some sort of advice about better weapon choices for me to use, because I don't feel great about how small a box I put my fighters into. And either way, I'll see you in the next one.